Hello, my name is Gary Retherford, and welcome to the Global Supply Chain Week. I am the Transportation Sector Chief for the InfraGard chapter in Cincinnati, Ohio. InfraGard is a partnership between the Federal Bureau of Investigation and members of the private sector for the protection of U.S. critical infrastructure. There are approximately 50,000 members and 80 plus local InfraGard member alliances. If you're interested in learning more about InfraGard or would like to join, go to our website at www.infragard.org. With us today is John T. Hoffman. He is a senior research fellow for the Food Protection and Defense Institute. And I'd like to hand it over to John now, and he can tell you a little bit more about himself. Hello, John.
Well, greetings. Great to be with you today. I'm with the Food Protection Defense Institute, University of Minnesota, and we're a center of excellence for the Department of Homeland Security focused on the food infrastructure system. I've been working in this field now for about 30 years on and off, primarily looking at system resilience and system protection. So it's a great opportunity today to talk about the transportation system and the food system. And I think most people will find this to be far more complex than they ever realized.
Very good. So, John, I wanted to ask you, if you would please describe at a very high level the United States food and agriculture supply chain and why it is so complex.
Interestingly, this is 1/6 of our economy. Few people really understand that. Our food system, from farm to fork, as we refer to it, is ubiquitous, broadly covers the entire country. In fact, even the globe. It's composed of lots of parts, myriad of parts, interconnections, and it's tightly interconnected into all the other critical infrastructures, including, transportation, water, electric, manufacturing. And interestingly, it's a system of systems, and people don't realize that. But it is so complex, has so many moving parts into it that few people really fully understand it. I certainly don't. I don't think anybody does. Everybody has expertise in certain areas, but to try to grasp the entire system takes a lot of study, a lot of work, and it's constantly morphing. It's constantly changing and evolving based on consumer demand, availability of products, climate change. All those things have an influence on it. And it is truly a vast international system of producers, processors, packagers, manufacturers, warehouse operations, transportation systems, retail food service operators. Just think of all those pieces and how they're all interconnected by this complex and layered system of systems. And it's a system of buyers and sellers all the way through it: wholesalers, distributors, processors, food service staff. It's extremely complex. The very nature of these relationships, as they kind of evolve through the transportation and supply chains involved, don't lend themselves to kind of traditional value and transactional information sharing, if you will. A lot of points in the supply chain, because of the buyer-seller relationship, the actual transactions themselves are intellectual property, and it has value, and in many cases can't be shared up and down the supply chain the way you might with some other more traditional, more linear supply chain. So it's a very complex system. It's configured to bring to retail and to food service products for the consumer at a reasonable price, with consistent quality, with the opportunity for each step in the process to be a profitable activity for whatever business is involved.
Very good. Can you talk a little bit about how it functions?
Well, this is a very complex system, and the way that it functions is very interesting. It's a system that's founded upon specific categories of inputs. They're injected into the food system supply chain, if you will, at various points all along these supply chains, starting, if you will, with pre-farm kind of activities, whether it's fertilizers or chemicals or breed stock or whatever may be put into the system. And that's true all the way through to retail and food service at your restaurants. There's an enormous array of these inputs, many more than most people even realize about how all these things fit together, come together at the right time, at the right place in the supply chain. Even those within the system and people at government and state and local who are inspectors and regulators frequently don't understand the full system. They know a piece of it. They know how this part functions, don't understand how the rest of it functions. So these inputs, again, can range from all kinds of things, from fertilizers, veterinary, pharmaceuticals, breed stock at the farm level. But then think about the rest of the supply chain at processing. You've got all kinds of packaging materials that are used for bulk packaging or bulk break, where you go down to smaller quantities of something. You have all the seasonings and food stabilizers and all those things that go in to making a food product ready to be put into market. Then you've got packaging. Just think about the packaging industry and the variety of things for packaging, whether it's paper or plastic, films, all sorts of containers that have to be assembled and be at the right place at the right time. And then you have labeling. Labeling is a huge issue. In fact, most people don't realize it, but labeling is highly regulated. Just look at a label today and all the information that's on that label, and think about what it takes to get that label printed somewhere in the world, delivered in bulk quantity to an individual plant, and then have it applied to the food product at the right time, the right label, and then it's shipped out, if you will, whether it's a bottled, canned, packaged product. There are thousands and thousands of items involved in how these products are manufactured all along the supply chain. And by the way, a lot of these inputs, they're not just domestic now. They're global. These inputs, whether it's paper products, labeling, food ingredients, seasoning, they come from all over the world. And of course, as products move through the supply chain, operations occur that change the product. So what looks like something coming off the farm as a traditional vegetable, or even animal agriculture product, by the time it goes through the various steps of processing, quality control checks, safety, regulatory inspections, manufacturing, packaging, transportation, it actually can change several times before you actually get it. Think about RTEs, whether it's a snack bar or beef jerky or a can of soup. Think how many changes have occurred to get that product through manufacturing into the transportation system, which, by the way, is very complex, and hundreds of different products going through any given location, if you will, within the system, because there are so many different pieces long before it reaches the consumer. And to do that in a way that keeps the price reasonable for the consumer.
Sure. So what are some of the challenges in monitoring, securing, and value preservation of these products as they move through these complex supply chains?
That's a great question. And that's really the big challenge today. Think about the food system and how it's globalized right now. Think of the growing risk to the system because it has become so vast and so complex. There's so many pieces to these supply chains that are moving all the time that have a fairly significant impact, if you will, on how the system functions. If you think back not too long ago, certainly in my lifetime, the majority of the fresh food that you ate and that you consumed in your home was probably highly seasonal. So that means it had to come from sources fairly close to where you are, maybe within 50 to 100 miles. And when you were out of season, then you didn't have them. Think of fresh tomatoes back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We had great fresh tomatoes in the spring and summer, maybe into the fall, but by wintertime, you're eating canned tomatoes because you didn't have those fresh seasonal kinds of products. Well, your shelf-stable products at that time, like canned goods, packaged dry products like, say, flour or rye or something for making bread, or frozen, like fish or vegetables, well, they could have come pretty much from anywhere in the United States, but they were mainly coming from the United States for the U.S. And these products generally moved, if you will, by train and then truck to wherever your community was. And they went through large warehouses before they went to your retail store. And back in those days, if you went to a retail store, there was a huge warehouse at the back of the retail store where they would pull from to keep the shelves filled. So deliveries to those big grocery stores or even medium-sized grocery store were probably only 2 or 3 times a week, maybe only once a week. They would get major deliveries. Well, accounting, quality control, consumer price, value preservation within the supply chain in those days was really based on just time, distance, and process steps and what the transportation modes were. And they were relatively simple. It was straightforward. You had pretty consistent movement of product. It was reasonably reliable and predictable. Quality on average was probably a bit lower than it is today, but it's pretty consistent. Today, it's a whole new world. I mean, supply chains are very, very different. First of all, they're not just domestic, they're global. And products can come from, all over the world. And they can come every day, if you will. Today, product availability is no longer seasonal. You can go into a grocery store today and you can get fresh peaches, you can get fresh apples, you can get fresh tomatoes and onions all year long, full bins of them at the store. So generally speaking, we're finding that these seasonal products now are actually, the availability is much higher and the quality is actually much better. And that quality is a lot more consistent today than it used to be. This change really began, say, in the 1980s because access, production volume, transportation systems have vastly improved. It's improved to the point today where instead of you having a local dairy near you produced, sending product to be produced in a local dairy plant that supplied your fresh milk and your ice cream, your cream and cheese, today we've got plants like there's one plant out west that provides fresh milk, liquid milk products every day to 27 states. Think of how the transportation system has changed, just the interstate system and the movement to just-in-time trucking. What's one of the consequences of that? Well, for one thing, there's no large warehouse in the back of your grocery store anymore. Food products are delivered to that grocery store or a restaurant or some food service commissary operation nearly every day. If you go into a grocery store today, you'll see somebody from this company or that company stocking shelves almost every day. So we have a much more complex just-in-time delivery system. Feeding that delivery system are expanded sources, domestic and global, that are coming together, feeding that transportation system that is supporting that supply chain and all those processing steps that we talked about to ensure that the shelf is full. Well, it's full most of the time. We do have the snow factor. Occasionally you'll see bread get in short supply, but how quickly is that recovered? It's usually recovered within days, if not the same day. So the system is much more efficient today, but think about how many parts there are moving within that supply chain and what the risks are. So the problem is that you still have a value preservation issue that occurs, but now it's much more complex because the supply chains are so much longer and there's so many more steps in the supply chain. Sourcing has become much more difficult to monitor from a quality control standpoint. And because there's so many components to this now, and there is so much transportation involved, the opportunity for criminal acts, either globally against the supply chain or even kind of locally in your community. Think of cargo theft. Think of a truck of food being stolen, those kinds of things. Those risks are vastly greater than they were before. Now, there have been steps that have been taken to try to improve this system. A major step was the first really substantial change to federal regulation in food in 2010 with the passage of the Food Safety Modernization Act. The intent here was to provide mechanisms to improve accountability, protect the consumer, if you will, provide a better means to be able to monitor the system for how it functions at all points along the supply chain. Another driver was to provide a better capability for tracing forward and tracing backwards. So if there are insults to the system, whether they're accidental safety issues or some intentional criminal act, some contamination event or something, you have the ability to trace back the product where it goes. This is a whole lot more challenging, however, than I think was realized by the people who wrote that law, and therein lies the rub. Actually putting the data in the right hands at the right time to be able to do traceback in food and food supply systems is far more complex than somebody trying to do the same thing with, making, computer monitors or, tools or a part for your car. A very complex system and difficult to do.
Okay, very good. Are you able to maybe elaborate a little bit more on what the food industry is trying to do to solve supply chain wide issues?
Well, there are a lot of things that are being done right now. I guess first and foremost, the major efforts in training. Interestingly, one of the things that's been identified in the Food Safety Modernization Act is the need to have better training for everybody at every point in the supply chain. Whether this is employees on the floor of a food manufacturing plant, people involved in transportation system, transportation management, record keeping, documentation. Training is a very big step in this process. But it's clear, even these mandated steps that have been put in place to protect against safety issues or any kind of intentional act are clearly not enough to solve the overall supply chain, what we call value preservation and quality control issues across the supply chain. And there are a lot of motivators to do these things, to fix this and improve it. Obviously, quality control is a big issue. We want the food to be safe and healthy for everybody. But another problem you have to wrestle with as you look at steps to take is the cost. Everything that you do in the supply chain is going to raise the cost of food. How much time and effort is put into that? It's a significant problem, given the fact that it's an industrial system that ranges across the world. We now have to use cyber, for example, in everything that we do. The systems are run with cyber; they're managed with cyber. Right there, you've got a huge risk that could involve in this that has to be dealt with. You have all these inputs, raw materials, and everything that are coming in. They are difficult to track. So there are a lot of tools that have been used, like RFID. There's even consideration of using blockchain in many places. But because products move through and are changed, they are commingled. They may be in bulk at one point, then they're subdivided, commingled with other products. So a lot of this value tracking, transactional tracking that people want to do become a real challenge. So you've got RFID, you've got blockchain opportunities, you've got other kinds of data management systems for monitoring, the trucks, GPS systems, vehicle location systems, RFIDs on pallets. All these things are going to have to be layered. There is no one solution for tracking this and making it work. They're going to have to be layered solutions that are put together and brought to bear within the supply chain. That's the challenge people face right now that we're working on. I see the driver here is going to be one, cost. Two, obviously preserving value going through this, but also you've got huge liability issues coming out of this. Think of a load of cargo food that's stolen, put back into commerce, but hasn't been properly maintained within the cold chain. So now you have the potential for criminals to be reselling product out of the back of a trailer or delivering it to some gray market store, and it's a potentially dangerous product. And think back, it's probably got a label on it. So if somebody gets sick with that product, they're going to look at the label and that's who they're going to go after. That's who they're going to say is responsible, when really the system has issues. And so this tracking, tracing, monitoring, transactional information tracking, value preservation that goes through is very important. And it's an area of focus that's going to become much more important as we move forward.
Very good. Well, could you also maybe give some recent examples of the supply chain challenges that have had potentially national significance?
We've had quite a few incidents. I mean, I mentioned cargo theft. Cargo theft has become a multi-billion-dollar problem, and it's identified already as an area that's raising consumer prices between 5 and 10% across a range of common everyday products. So we've got to deal with that. And unfortunately, cargo theft is really looked upon from a law enforcement standpoint as a vehicle theft, where within the supply chain, it's the product theft that's the major problem and creates the major risk. But we've also got cross-infrastructure issues. Just think of the water system hack down near Tampa a week or so ago. Water's crucial to food processing, whether you're at manufacturing level, the farm level, or retail, restaurant, um, retail sales. Water's crucial. So if the water system is contaminated or the water system is disrupted, you're going to disrupt the supply chain. Frequently, these systems are disrupted because of ransom attacks or those kinds of things. But the effect is cross infrastructure. If electrical system gets targeted by hackers and shut down, you're going to shut down food operations. We need electricity, we need water, you need the sewer systems. All those things have to be operating. And of course, we're also experiencing cyber attacks at the food plant operation level. Industrial controls being targeted. That presents a whole nother range of issues. So a lot of work needs to be done in securing these systems in the food world.
Very good. Well, thanks a lot, John, for all this insightful information. Really appreciate that. And again, this is Gary Retherford with InfraGard, a FBI private sector collaborative. And if you're interested in learning more or perhaps joining InfraGard, go to www.infragard.org. Thank you.
Glad to be with you.